What's going on, guys? Briar Rabbit here. Today we're going to be talking about the GeForce RTX 2060 graphics card. This is the Founders Edition from NVIDIA. And full disclosure, NVIDIA did send me this card for the purposes of this review. So let's talk about the card itself. This does run on NVIDIA's new Turing architecture. It does have 6 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM, and it is capable of real-time ray tracing at an affordable price. Now, some caveats with real-time ray tracing on the 2060, or frankly any card at this point. There's one game that supports it. It's Battlefield 5. And there's a huge caveat to Battlefield 5 and ray tracing, and that is that you have to switch from DirectX 11 to DirectX 12 when running Battlefield 5 to enable real-time ray tracing. Battlefield 5 doesn't really run that good in DirectX 12, which influences how you perceive the ray tracing to operate. The ray tracing looks spectacular, and if you're looking for a low-priced, or well, relatively low-priced way of just checking out what all the fuss is about, this is as cheap as you're gonna get, $350 for the Founders Edition card, and you can finally check out real-time ray tracing. I got an average of about 53 frames per second when running Battlefield 5 at 1080p with ray tracing enabled. Using a G-Sync monitor or an adaptive sync monitor, that is technically playable. For me, I'd rather turn it off and get about 100 frames per second at a Battlefield 5 and DirectX 11. The game just feels smoother and looks nicer, at 100 frames per second than it does at 50 frames per second. But it is interesting because at $350, it gives you a taste of what ray tracing has to offer. I am looking forward to in the future seeing more games implement ray tracing. Right now we have just the one to test, and because it doesn't run good in DirectX 12, there's a huge caveat to actually testing it. But if you've been looking forward to seeing what all the fuss is about with ray tracing, this is a good entry point. So aside from ray tracing, I like this card a lot. As with all the Founders Edition in the RTX series so far, this does come with a dual fan design. The cooling is very good. I never saw the card stock go above about 68 degrees, and it doesn't seem too loud either. The fan profile stock is also tuned for silence, so if you want to overclock this card, which you could do and get pretty good performance out of it, you got plenty of headroom with the fans as well. I really like the design of these cards. I've liked them since they first released them with the 2080 and 2080 Ti. I think the compact design is a pretty nice one. They take up 2 slots, not 2.5 slots, or 2.7 slots, or 3 slots. And they're fairly compatible with other things you might put in a system. And if you want to do a smaller form factor build, the 2060 is definitely going to help with that due to its smaller size. I also like the general design of having the pretty uniform side with the power on the end here. And it does make cable management a little easier to do, I thought, but that's going to be preference as well. But if you're looking for a compact graphics card that I think is pretty attractive, the 2060 is going to be there for you. Let's talk about performance of the 2060 a little bit before we keep moving. In most games at 1080p, I was able to game at high refresh rates. Now, depending on the game, some games are obviously harder than others, but in a game like Hitman 2, I'm able to average about 102 frames per second with 1% lows being about 73. In Battlefield 5 and DirectX 11, I'm able to hit 109 average with 1% lows being about 83. And with DXR on, or with ray tracing on, I'm only able to hit about 53 average with 44 being the 1% lows. Now, some games were a little harder on the card. For instance, at 1080p with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I was only able to average 61 frames per second. With Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I was able to average about 87. And with Forza Horizon 4, I was able to average about 77. Now, all of those figures are at extreme or ultra settings, and you can certainly lower your graphics quality settings to high or medium to get much higher frame rates in the games that you like to play. At 1440, you're definitely starting to butt into the performance limits of the card. What you're really gonna wanna do at that point is to try and adjust your in-game settings to give you a sustained 60 frames per second, which the game is definitely capable of doing. Even on Ultra, Forza Horizon 4 was able to average 60 frames per second. Assassin's Creed was able to average 47 frames per second. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was able to go 54. Hitman 2 was able to hit 77, which actually wasn't too bad. Battlefield 5 on DX11 was able to average 87 frames per second with a 1% load time of 69. And with ray tracing enabled, it was only able to hit 37 frames per second with a 1% low of 29.5. So again, at 1440p, you're really gonna wanna try and target 60 frames per second and adjust the in-game sliders to hit that target. With 4K, you're really gonna wanna buy a better graphics card or spend a little bit more on a graphics card if you want to game at 60 frames per second. You can probably hit 4K 30 frames per second in a lot of games, but at that point, you're really, you know, at what point do you hit diminishing returns? You know, for me personally, I'd rather play at 1080p and hit those high refresh rates, especially in shooters. So where is this card comparatively to other graphics cards? Well, it's about 50% more powerful than a 1060 6GB of the previous generation, and about as powerful, maybe just a hair faster than a 1070 Ti. So that should kind of be informative if you're thinking about upgrading on whether the RTX 2060 is worth it to you. You know, if you got a 1070 Ti, a 1080, probably not. You probably want to look higher up in the spectrum. If you got a 1050 or a 1050 Ti, maybe even a 1063 gigabyte, you might look at the 2060 and think it might be a good value for you. One of the newer developments with GeForce graphics cards is that they now support some FreeSync monitors, adaptive sync monitors that aren't necessarily G-Sync. So one of the knocks against the more affordable NVIDIA graphics cards in the past was that if you paid the same amount of money for a NVIDIA card and an AMD card, and you had the same amount of performance in both cards, when you went to buy a monitor and you wanted adaptive sync technology, if you bought a GeForce monitor with G-Sync, then it was going to cost you substantially more than an AMD FreeSync monitor, while offering very similar benefits. Now NVIDIA is actually supporting some FreeSync monitors as G-Sync compatible, which means that you can actually buy a FreeSync monitor and it will function with adaptive sync on a GeForce RTX 2060, for instance. It's a really nice change, and it takes one of those knocks away from the NVIDIA lower cost graphics cards that was previous there. There are some caveats to that, namely that the NVIDIA cards will only support FreeSync through a DisplayPort connector, but a lot of FreeSync compatible monitors only support it through HDMI. So if you're buying an NVIDIA card and you want to buy a FreeSync monitor, do your research, make sure that it's compatible. I'm sure that in the coming months there will be plenty of reviews on FreeSync monitors and whether or not they work properly with NVIDIA cards. The cooler design, all right, so I like the cooler design in that it looks really good. I think that it's just got like a real clean aesthetic to it, and it's real modern looking. It's not as gaudy and as, like, you know, techno nerdy as something like a ROG Strix model. But if you want to service this unit, maybe you want to change out the thermal paste, or you want to replace a faulty fan, or if you want to water cool it, you're in for some troubles. The thing is very difficult to take apart. A lot of it is glued together. There's a lot of screws in there. If you're looking to get something a little more serviceable, or if you're looking to water cool an RTX 2060, you're probably going to want to look at an add-in board partner variant of the card. And that's probably the main added value of buying a partner card right now, because this thing is $350 and that's the base price of a 2060 right now. If you go out and you look for pricing on other 2060s by Asus or Gigabyte or MSI, they're all a little bit more money. And they don't offer a whole lot more in terms of performance. What they do offer, though, is serviceability. So with most partner cards, you're going to be able to take the thing apart without too much fuss and get to that thermal paste, get to those fans, get to something that has faulty wiring, or even put a water cooler on the unit. With this thing, anybody but the most experienced kind of computer guy not going to want to take this thing apart. I certainly don't want to take it apart. Overall, I've got to say, I think that the RTX 2060 is in a pretty good spot. It really hits the sweet spot for me personally as a gamer. When I game in first person, when I play first person shooters, let's say Destiny 2, I want to play in high refresh rate 1080p, and this graphics card can do it. If I want to play something like Shadow of the Tomb Raider or a third person action adventure game, I'll throw that on a 1440p monitor, and 60 frames per second is fine for that. And this does both of those things, assuming that you kind of adjust your sliders accordingly for the in-game settings. And to me, that's a really interesting thing. It's a really good price point for that type of gaming. There's nothing really that compares with it until you start overclocking like a Vega 56. But at that point, if you're talking about overclocking, you can also overclock this card very well and get 2070 type performance out of an overclock. Now, a 2070 is $150 more, and of course you can overclock a 2070 as well, but I do really like this card. I do think it is perfectly suited to 1080p gaming and some light 1440p stuff as well. And if you're looking to just check out ray tracing, this will get you your foot in that door as well. That's gonna do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button if you like the video, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.